The costumes, the hair. There's only one ABBA. And after decades of going their own way, the Swedish supergroup is back.
In the middle and the beginning of the 80s, ABBA was so uncool. How can you make digital copies? One idea. That's it. At 79, Bjorn Ulvaeus, one of the masterminds behind ABBA, has finally broken his silence and revealed the awful truth behind the iconic band's breakup. Fans who have long speculated about the reasons for their split are in for a shocking revelation. In the middle and the beginning of the 80s, ABBA was so uncool. It was dead, I thought. Completely. Now, Ulvaeus opens up about the real reasons that led to the end of their musical journey. Truths that fans will not believe. Bjorn Ulvaeus and Agnetha Fältskog have long been celebrated as members of one of the world's most beloved bands, and as one of the most beautiful, talented, and captivating onstage couples in music history. Together, they embodied a kind of magic that few bands have ever replicated. With Agnetha's stunning, emotive voice and Bjorn's gifted songwriting and musicianship, they formed the emotional and creative backbone of ABBA, helping to propel the Swedish group into worldwide fame time and time again. For many fans, their relationship seemed almost too good to be true. From the outside, they represented an idealized form of love, talented, gorgeous, and successful. Their chemistry on stage, captured in countless performances and promotional appearances, only fueled the fascination. It wasn't just about the music. It was about the story. The dream of a perfect artistic and romantic partnership. People admired and envied them in equal measure, weaving their own narratives around the couple's apparent fairy tale romance. Even now, decades later, fans continue to write about Bjorn and Agnetha's love story, longing for that kind of deep connection in their own lives. This is why it came as a profound shock when the news broke that Bjorn and Agnetha had decided to divorce. In many ways, the announcement felt like a personal loss to millions of people who had lived vicariously through their music and public appearances. It was more than just the dissolution of a marriage. It symbolized the beginning of the end for ABBA itself. Although the band would continue to work together for a few more years, the emotional core had been irreparably changed. Without that central love story, the band's dynamic, both musically and personally, was never quite the same. Years later, Bjorn opened up about how and why things came to an end between him and Agnetha, revealing details that only deepened the sense of heartbreak. Contrary to what many might have assumed, that such a split would come after long discussions or mutual decisions, Bjorn admitted that it was he who had initiated the divorce, and the way he did it was not only sudden, but also extremely painful. At the time, Agnetha had been struggling with the intense pressures of fame and the challenges of motherhood, feeling increasingly isolated and unhappy. Bjorn, on the other hand, had become emotionally distant, struggling with his own inner turmoil. Instead of confronting these issues head-on and trying to work through them, Bjorn made the painful choice to leave. And he did so in a way that many have described as cold. He simply announced that he was moving on, leaving Agnetha devastated. In the summer of 1979, during a period marked by deep personal turmoil, Bjorn Ulvaeus and Benny Andersson retreated to a small cottage on Vigsy Island to begin work on new music. It was there, amid the isolated stillness of the Swedish archipelago, that they began to craft what would become one of ABBA's most iconic and emotionally charged songs. The Winner Takes It All. According to Andersson, the initial spark for the track came not from a fully formed new idea, but from fragments of older musical sketches, small pieces they had stored away over time, waiting for the right moment to bring them to life. At this point, Bjorn's marriage to Agnetha Fältskog was rapidly unraveling. Though both he and Agnetha had mutually agreed that a divorce was inevitable and perhaps even necessary, the emotional fallout was far more complicated than a simple decision to part ways. For Bjorn, who had always expressed his deepest feelings through music, there was an urgent need to find a way to channel his tangled emotions, the sadness, guilt, anger, and confusion, into something tangible. Music was his only real language, and writing this song would become a form of therapy for him. Initially, the demo for the song bore the working title "The Story of My Life," a blunt acknowledgement of how personal the track truly was. Bjorn poured all the conflicting emotions he was wrestling with into the draft. The first arrangement they created was surprisingly up-tempo, with a steady, almost mechanical pace. But both Bjorn and Benny quickly realized that this version felt too rigid and sterile. The raw pain Bjorn was trying to express simply didn't fit the neat, bouncy structure. Recognizing the mismatch, they shelved the song for a few days, focusing on other compositions while letting the idea for this one breathe. 4 days later, they returned to it with fresh eyes and an entirely different approach. Anderson suggested that they reframe the song in the style of a French chanson, a more fluid, emotional form of music characterized by a descending piano line and an unforced structure. This new arrangement allowed the song to breathe and gave it a more open-hearted, confessional feeling, perfectly matching the lyrical theme of loss and regret. To further flesh out the idea, Benny recorded a rough tape featuring a descending piano melody while singing random French-sounding gibberish as placeholders for lyrics. This abstract recording was then handed to Bjorn, who took it home to craft the final lyrics. According to Bjorn, the process of writing the words was intensely emotional and somewhat chaotic. He drank whiskey heavily that night, admitting later that he was drunk for most of the writing session. Yet, ironically, it was also the fastest lyric writing experience he ever had, the main lines pouring out of him in a rush of unfiltered feeling within about an hour. As Bjorn wrote, he wrestled with the devastating reality of what he and Agnetha were about to finalize. Though their divorce was amicable in theory, in practice, it was tearing them both apart. There was no obvious villain or victim, no clear winner or loser, just two people who had once loved each other deeply but could no longer continue together. That painful ambiguity bled into the heart of the song. When the lyrics were completed, Bjorn nervously handed the sheet of paper to Agnetha to read. Her reaction was immediate and profound. She began to cry, though Bjorn would later publicly claim that the song was not literally about their divorce, that it was a work of fiction inspired by the general experience of separation. It was clear to everyone involved, including Agnetha herself, that the words reflected a deep personal truth. Even if the song's events did not align perfectly with their real-life story, the emotions behind them were entirely genuine. Despite the personal cost, Agnetha agreed to sing the lead vocals for the track. When she finally performed it, her voice captured a sense of vulnerability and heartbreak so pure that it left listeners around the world convinced they were hearing a true story unfold. Every note she sang seemed weighted with the pain of love lost, the resignation of defeat, and the bittersweet acceptance that sometimes in matters of the heart, there can be no true winners. For years, fans have wondered what really led Bjorn Ulvaeus to ask Agnetha Feltskog to sing The Winner Takes It All, a song so painfully raw and personal, written by Bjorn himself, describing scenes of heartbreak, betrayal, and emotional devastation. Divorce is already one of life's most brutal experiences, but being asked to perform, night after night, a song that touches so directly on the loss of your own marriage, especially when the words were penned by your former partner, seems almost cruel. However, the story behind this decision is deeply entangled with the complex, emotionally fraught relationship that Bjorn and Agnetha had built and unraveled over the years. To truly understand why Bjorn handed Agnetha this heartbreaking song to perform, it's necessary to look at the foundation of their relationship and the cracks that had long been forming beneath the surface, even while everything appeared picture-perfect from the outside. When Bjorn and Agnetha first met, their bond was electric. Both were young, passionate about music, and at pivotal moments in their careers, their attraction was intense and immediate. Driven by a combination of love, ambition, and artistic excitement, they married quickly. From the outside, theirs was a fairy tale relationship, two beautiful, talented musicians building a life, and later, a world-famous band, together. To fans and observers, they embodied a dream of success, love, and unity. But within that dream, seeds of future heartbreak were already being planted. Both Bjorn and Agnetha were deeply ambitious. Their careers were not simply part of their lives. They were their lives. Music dominated everything, often taking precedence over family, over rest, over emotional needs. Even after the birth of their children, the relentless drive for professional success left little room for nurturing their private relationship. The life of constant touring, recording, and promoting wore down whatever fragile balance they had managed to maintain at home. At the beginning, their different personalities seemed complementary. Agnetha craved emotional comfort, stability, and genuine intimacy, a haven from the demanding world outside. Bjorn, meanwhile, valued structure, control, and a sense of professional purpose. What initially looked like minor, manageable differences grew into deep, widening divides. Bjorn's need for control clashed with Agnetha's yearning for affection and understanding. She felt increasingly isolated, while he felt increasingly suffocated by emotional expectations he either could not or would not meet. Over time, the passion that had once fueled their relationship began to fade, leaving behind tension, resentment, and emotional distance. Both had sacrificed much for their careers, but in doing so they also sacrificed pieces of themselves and of each other. What had once been a partnership of equals became a relationship marred by loneliness and unmet needs. When the decision to divorce was made, it was portrayed publicly as amicable. In reality, the process was gut-wrenching for both. Bjorn's decision to write The Winner Takes It All during this period of turmoil wasn't an act of cruelty, but rather an attempt to cope with his own tangled emotions. Music was the only medium through which he could express the devastation he himself was struggling to understand. But why Agnetha? Why ask her to sing words that must have felt like a dagger through the heart? The answer lies partly in the undeniable truth that Agnetha was the only one who could have truly conveyed the depth of the song's sorrow. Her voice, known for its emotional clarity and vulnerability, was capable of translating private anguish into universal feeling. No other member of ABBA could have given The Winner Takes It All its haunting power. Bjorn may have written the words, but it was Agnetha who gave them life, a life that resonated with millions. Bjorn later admitted that while the song was not a literal retelling of their marriage's breakdown, it was heavily influenced by the emotions of that moment. When Agnetha first read the lyrics, she wept, not out of anger at Bjorn, but because the song so painfully captured a truth that both of them were living. There was no winner in their breakup, only mutual loss. In asking Agnetha to sing the song, Bjorn was not trying to punish her. He was acknowledging, perhaps subconsciously, that she was the only one who could fully bear and share the emotional weight they both carried. Their relationship had begun with passion and idealism, driven by dreams of music and love. It ended with heartbreak, but also with one final shattering act of artistic creation, a song that turned their private pain into something timeless and beautiful. According to Bjorn, Agnetha became incredibly possessive and fearful as ABBA's popularity exploded. What had begun as the typical concerns of a young wife and mother evolved into something far more intense and consuming. Agnetha constantly worried, often irrationally, about what might happen to her or her family. The dangers she envisioned were many: Bjorn cheating with a fan or fellow musician, an obsessed follower stalking them, plane crashes wiping them out while they toured internationally, leaving their children orphaned. Every aspect of their life seemed to offer new opportunities for disaster in Agnetha's mind. These fears weren't merely passing thoughts. They shaped her day-to-day existence. Friends and colleagues recalled how Agnetha would often have a worried, anxious look in her eyes, even in moments when everything seemed fine. Fame had placed her under a pressure that intensified her natural sensitivities to a breaking point. Being constantly in the public eye made her feel vulnerable, exposed, and perpetually unsafe. Sleep offered no escape from her mounting anxiety. Instead of finding rest, Agnetha began suffering from night terrors, vivid, horrifying dreams where she would imagine the most unspeakable tragedies happening to her family. These episodes further weakened her mental health, leaving her exhausted and emotionally unstable. Over time, Agnetha's worries created a self-perpetuating cycle. The more anxious she became, the more isolated she felt. The more isolated she felt, the more clingy and desperate for reassurance she became. Her desperate need for security and constant affirmation eventually placed a heavy strain on Bjorn. At first, he may have tried to soothe and support her, but as her fears grew more consuming, it began to overwhelm him. Instead of bringing them closer, Agnetha's anxiety had the opposite effect, driving a wedge between them that widened each day. Bjorn began to view her neediness as suffocating. Instead of offering comfort, he pulled away, becoming emotionally colder and increasingly detached. His need for structure and control clashed violently with Agnetha's emotional chaos. This shift in Bjorn's behavior didn't go unnoticed. Agnetha, already deeply sensitive, felt the change keenly. The man she had once turned to for strength was slipping away, leaving her more vulnerable than ever. In response, she became even more desperate for his attention, a reaction that only accelerated the breakdown of their relationship. The cracks between them were now undeniable. Bjorn's growing detachment and emotional control were reflected later in the lyrics of The Winner Takes It All, where the lines hint at a relationship where love has turned into a game of winners and losers, with neither side able to truly salvage what was lost. It is even possible that, in his growing dissatisfaction and emotional starvation within the marriage, Bjorn began to seek affection and validation outside of their relationship. While nothing was ever confirmed publicly, the suspicion was another devastating blow to Agnetha's already fragile sense of security. Faced with a husband she no longer recognized, consumed by her own jealousy and heartbreak, Agnetha began to experience a slow, painful, emotional detachment. What had once been a passionate, all-consuming love began to fade. The realization dawned on her, perhaps gradually at first, that they were no longer the young, dream-chasing couple they had been at the beginning. The deep differences between them, once overlooked in the rush of youthful passion, now seemed insurmountable. As the tension and sadness between the members grew heavier, the effects inevitably seeped into the music. ABBA's signature sound, once bursting with joy and energy, took on a darker, more melancholic tone. The magic that had once captured the hearts of millions began to dim. The group's appeal to the public started to wane, and it became clear that their personal troubles were starting to bleed into their professional lives. Recognizing this shift, Bjorn made the difficult decision. It was time for ABBA to end. Though painful, he knew the band could not survive much longer under the weight of broken relationships and emotional exhaustion. Agnetha agreed, at least outwardly. Yet beneath the surface, both she and Bjorn were deeply sentimental, quietly mourning not just the band's end, but also the loss of a partnership that had once meant everything. They both carried the memories of better times, the early days filled with passion, laughter, and dreams, and the knowledge that despite everything, there had once been a bond worth celebrating. For Bjorn, his decision seemed validated as he moved forward. He eventually found stability, remarrying and continuing his musical career. But for Agnetha, the post-divorce years were a far rougher journey, filled with loneliness, emotional turmoil, and a desperate search for peace that always seemed just out of reach. Already struggling with the pressures of fame, even during ABBA's prime, Agnetha found stardom even more unbearable after the divorce. The added burden of single motherhood, combined with the trauma of a broken marriage, began to take a severe toll on her. Her mental and physical health deteriorated as she grappled with anxiety, depression, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. In an attempt to heal the wounds left by her failed relationship, Agnetha sought solace in a string of romantic entanglements, none of which lasted or truly brought her the comfort she craved. Among her lovers was an ice hockey star, a fashion designer, and, in a particularly controversial chapter of her life, Håkan Lundberg, her psychiatrist at the time she was struggling to save her marriage with Bjorn. The professional boundary crossed in that relationship highlighted just how vulnerable and desperate Agnetha had become for any connection that could ease her pain. Her pattern of becoming involved with those meant to protect her repeated itself when she entered a relationship with Stockholm detective Thorbjorn Brander. He had been assigned to protect her after she received terrifying kidnapping threats against her, children, and other hate mail threats that only deepened her growing fear and distrust of the world around her. Still, this relationship too ended, as did her later marriage to surgeon Thomas Sonnenfeld, a union that could not withstand the shadows of Agnetha's unresolved trauma. Throughout all of this, tragedy struck her family as well. In a particularly devastating period, Agnetha's mother died by suicide, an event that shattered her already fragile sense of stability and safety. Just a year later, she also lost her father, compounding her grief and leaving her feeling more alone than ever. The losses seemed to confirm her worst fears, that the world was a dangerous, unforgiving place where love and security could vanish in an instant. As her mental health worsened, Agnetha withdrew even further from public life. She stopped trusting those around her, refused to confide in friends or family, and chose to suffer in silence. Despite her fame, she found herself more isolated than she had ever been, trapped within her own mind, suspicious of even those who tried to help. Her fear of betrayal, abandonment, and harm, fears that had haunted her since ABBA's heyday, now dominated her life completely. In stark contrast to Agnetha's descent into emotional isolation and repeated heartbreak, Bjorn found himself able to move forward with remarkable ease, both professionally and personally. Creatively, Bjorn continued to thrive. He maintained a close working relationship with his longtime friend and ABBA bandmate, Benny Andersson. Together, they transitioned smoothly into new musical ventures. Even as ABBA's era came to an end, Bjorn and Benny's partnership endured, allowing them to explore different styles and projects outside of the band's original pop formula. They worked on musicals, most notably Chess, which achieved significant international success and proved that their creative spark was far from extinguished. In the years that followed, their collaboration would lead to further accomplishments, including contributions to the stage musical Mamma Mia, a phenomenon that would introduce ABBA's music to a whole new generation. Bjorn's ability to focus on his work seemed almost effortless compared to the turmoil Agnetha was facing. His mental resilience and emotional adaptability helped him navigate the tumultuous period following the end of ABBA without falling into the same traps of anxiety and depression that plagued his ex-wife. Perhaps it was his pragmatic nature, the same quality that once clashed with Agnetha's emotional sensitivity, that now enabled him to weather the storms of fame, divorce, and career transition with relative calm. His personal life also flourished in a way Agnetha's sadly did not. In 1981, just a few years after his divorce, Bjorn met Lena Kellershow, a music journalist. Their connection was immediate and they quickly fell in love. That same year they married, beginning what would become a remarkably strong and enduring relationship. Unlike his tumultuous marriage to Agnetha, Bjorn's union with Lena seemed grounded in shared values, emotional stability, and mutual understanding. The bond between them proved to be deeply resilient, lasting over 4 decades, a testament to the personal growth and maturity Bjorn had gained through his earlier life experiences. What do you think about the truth behind ABBA's breakup? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.